So when looking at the 8th Doctor era on the surface level, especially with television, we see a rather short and abrupt history of such a beloved incarnation of the Doctor. The 1996 TV movie to introduce this incarnation was a co-production of Universal Studios and the BBC, making their first attempt after the cancellation of the show, ending with the TV serial Survival. The producer's goal wasn't a reboot of the series, but a continuation of the narrative to connect the Doctor's story after Survival that leads into the 7th Doctor's regeneration to introduce the 8th Doctor performed by Paul McGann. The 8th Doctor's other appearance, to everyone's delight in Night of the Doctor, was a 6-minute 50th anniversary short setup to establish the lead up of the War Doctor in Day of the Doctor and the Time War. The 8th Doctor, along with the 9th Doctor, before the reveal of John Hurt's War Doctor in Series 7, were heavily discussed to play a significant part in the Time War when the 9th Doctor referenced a war that destroyed his people. So how can the 8th Doctor be such a beloved incarnation despite his limited appearance on television? This is where the Wilderness Years and the extended media come into play. Despite the Wilderness Years being the bleakest time in the show's history following the classic era's cancellation, it offers some of the most interesting, rich, experimental and expansive storytelling for any incarnation of the Doctor. This includes the infamous EDA books that featured over 70 books with multiple arcs, plots and storylines, comic books, and the most popular media undoubtedly for the 8th Doctor, why the incarnation of the 8th Doctor is so loved, the Big Finish audios that started the 8th Doctor's journey in the monthly range, when the company Big Finish was in its early beginnings. Following the original transmission of the 8th Doctor TV movie, his story would continue with the BBC books. Let's take a look at the infamous EDA 8th Doctor Adventure books. The 8th Doctor Adventure books, or simply called EDA books, were the continuation from not only the TV movie, but the Virgin New Adventures when the license agreement changed for Virgin Publishing to create new Doctor Who original novels. If you're interested in a guide to the Virgin New Adventures, I recommend watching this video as prompted by the video card. When the Virgin New Adventures concluded with its original line with the Dying Days, the EDA books alongside the PDA books, called the Past Doctor Adventures, continued the limelight of what the Virgin New Adventures established in the early 90s. While the EDA books weren't as reckless with adult content compared to the Virgin books that didn't have any filter, the EDA and PDA books still have themes, dialogue and violence the TV series and even Torchwood wouldn't dare to produce. In the beginning of the range, the BBC books didn't have any connection or acknowledgement to the Virgin books, but as the series progressed, the BBC books, including the EDAs, started to have connections, links and callbacks to the Virgin New Adventures, such as the faction Paradox, a voodoo time traveller cult created by Lawrence Miles, started with Christmas on a Rational Planet with the Grandfather Paradox, which would later be introduced in the EDA range with Alien Bodies, but with the unfavourable reviews of Faction Paradox and being quite controversial because of its convoluted writing, Lawrence Miles took the Faction Paradox into a spin-off series. Before the original EDA novels began, the BBC books started out with a novelisation of the TV movie, but wasn't part of the EDA series and considered a standalone novelisation. But where the EDA book started was in June 1997 with the 8 Doctors, which acted as a sequel and follow-up right after the events of the TV movie, who featured the companion Sam, who will play a significant role in the series, such as the Faction Paradox of the EDA books. And that is what the EDA novels are plagued and infamous for. The arcs, criticised for being very complex, convoluted and lengthy, that spanned multiple books, that would scare off some people by the sheer overwhelming number of EDA books and not having an idea where to even start and what book is safe as a standalone read, which the Virgin New Adventures don't really suffer from this problem. The main arcs within the EDA books, not including its mini arcs, were Faction Paradox with Sam, Fitz and Compassion, references to the last great time war with the Ancestor Cell, the Earth arc with Angie, the post-war universe, the Sabbath arc, and the eventual lead up to Sometime Never, the biggest and most daring book out of the whole range that closes off the arcs within the series. The EDA books concluded with the Gallifrey Chronicles in 2005, since the 8th Doctor was no longer the current incarnation because of the Revival series. The 8th Doctor didn't exactly end here, as the PDA books did feature Fear itself, featuring the 8th Doctor, and that ends the series of the 8th Doctor books. It was sadly farewell to the original BBC books, the EDAs and PDAs that retired in 2005, to make way for new projects, although there were rumblings of 8th Doctor stories to continue in the PDA range, as the final book in the range, titled Atom Bomb Blues, wasn't considered to be the final novel within the series. This never happened, and the journey of the BBC 8th Doctor adventures were concluded, but not his stories per se, as Big Finish short trips, Telos publishing novellas, and comics came after. The 8th Doctor comics were famous for featuring villains including the Toymaker in Endgame and the rather mysterious futuristic looking Flood Cybermen in the story titled The Flood, but undoubtedly the most popular, well known and adored stories featuring the 8th Doctor and why he is so loved were the Big Finish audios. The 8th Doctor with Big Finish can be divided down into multiple sections, or eras as I like to say, to describe the vast collection and catalogue Big Finish have provided for the 8th Doctor. You have the monthly range era, or as I sometimes like to call it, the Gary Russell era, the Big Finish 8th Doctor adventures with Lucy Miller, the box set format with Dark Eyes, Doom Coalition, Ravenous and Stranded, the Time War era, the new box set releases where Big Finish took the preferred method of being more consistent with making box sets their main production, not just including the 8th Doctor, and then simply spin-off releases, companion chronicles and short trips. The man Alan Barnes was the individual who started the 8th Doctor's journey with Big Finish with Storm Warning with the companion Charlie. The 8th Doctor audios in the monthly range in the first 50 audios had an overarching plot concerning Zagreus, being release 50, first referenced in Project Twilight by the 6th Doctor. If you're familiar with the monthly range, the past Doctors, not including the 8th Doctor, had audios not in a sequential order but more randomised, but the 8th Doctor had releases that followed from each other in the numbering system. From Storm Warning with the 8th Doctor audios, it continued with Sword of Orion, Stones of Venice and Minute in Hell. The second bulk of 8th Doctor adventures featured 6 8th Doctor audios back to back, including the popular and well-loved Chimes of Midnight, regarded as the best Big Finish audio of all time, along with Spare Parts. But the audio that connected to build the Zagreus plotline is the most important one to highlight here, Neverland, which served as the build-up and prequel to Zagreus, but also concluded Charlie's arc that started in Invaders from Mars concerning a paradox involving the character and an event that took place which I will not spoil, so it's definitely recommended with the Big Finish monthly range 8th Doctor adventures to listen to them in order, with the conclusion of the Zagreus arc, which later would build into the Project Forge arc, which acted as the main arc and storyline for the Big Finish monthly range, but the following arc, titled Divergent Universe, certainly brought the weird and wonderful for the 8th Doctor, beginning with Scherzo and ending with The Next Life. Speaking of Scherzo, the jump scare actually scared the living daylights out of me. That made me shit bricks. Considering the arc has its highlights, and sometimes its dull stinkers, sorry Creed of the Croman, Chris, you really got a stinker with the introduction and your conclusion. The series offers some of the most fascinating stories in all of Doctor Who, and perhaps what Doctor Who is all about for people. Weird, but wonderful. The 8th Doctor with Charlie in the monthly range concluded with The Girl Who Never Was, but following after this release, we had an anthology release and a new trilogy titled The Mary Shelley Trilogy, with stories with a gothic horror twist, with a Mondasian Cyberman playing the piano, witches, and an undead skeleton army. But 2006 offered a new consistent range after the 8th Doctor story concluded with Charlie, who she stumbles across the 6th Doctor, which would later lead into her own spin-off box set releases. That would be the 8th Doctor Adventures. These were more designed as a more fast-paced and focused less on rather dense and heavy arcs and storytelling, but designed more in the way of the modern series to present itself. 1 hour long audios that spanned 4 series, including an additional box set to fans' delightment. While the monthly range story's direction and delivery is more to my own personal taste because of its experimental nature, the 8th Doctor Adventures fit better for modern day fans to experience the 8th Doctor without feeling overwhelmed by the huge catalogue of stories. So if you're a modern day fan, I definitely recommend them. The series concluded with a soul-destroying and bleak To the Death that featured the Daleks, which would lead into the box set series of releases, Dark Eyes, and the slow build up to the Time War. Dark Eyes, Doom Coalition, Ravenous and Stranded could be considered the most expansive, but at the same time, most friendly introduction to the 8th Doctor of all time, and quite a common place where people were introduced with the incarnation. Dark Eyes was originally intended to just be one box set, but with its huge success in 2012 and fans singing its praises from years to come, it was only fitting to continue the series. Dark Eyes had many subtle hints and nods to the slow build-up of the Time War, and also featured the Dalek Time Controller as the main adversary, along with Alex McQueen's Master, and definitely an underrated version of the Master, and the Eminence. Whereas Doom Coalition and Ravenous felt more that they followed each other and compared to each other more, while Dark Eyes felt like it was its own thing and identity. And then Stranded came along in 2020 and felt too close to home considering what took place. If I were to recommend any, I would say Dark Eyes. Not that I consider it the best, but it's the more fitting introduction, and while the original Dark Eyes box set doesn't get the praise as much as it used to, with the Big Finish's catalogue always expanding to obscene amount, it provides an excellent introduction with rich collection of stories, concepts, villains and ideas. But saying that, Time War without question have offered some of the most entertaining collection of storytelling for the 8th Doctor, which expanded on his incarnation and the darker aspects of his incarnation, which would lead into the eventual transition into the War Doctor, something he never believed would happen. And now we are in the year 2024, where the new era of Big Finish of the box set formats is now the norm, featuring more single releases not connected or restricted to any arcs per se, very beginner friendly. That was a quick guide to the 8th Doctor era and the various series and stories on offer for the incarnation. If you dare to put yourself up to the challenge and you're an avid reader, the EDA books in order I recommend, but the convoluted arcs might make you go crazy. See how far you make it. If you're wanting to go to the Big Finish direction, you want something more experimental, the monthly range audios, especially the Gary Russell era of Big Finish, are definitely up your alley. More inclined with the new series format, the 8th Doctor Lucy Miller Adventures are definitely the best start. But if I was to say the ultimate best starting out point, Dark Eyes. Thanks for watching the guide on the 8th Doctor era with the EDA books and Big Finish.